Hide Your Smiling Faces is a childhood coming-of-age drama. I'm wondering if the drama on screen of that childhood is in any way reflective of your own childhood.
Yeah, it's certainly reflective of it. It's not an autobiographical film, but there's a number of scenes that I had written down, kind of as a way to just sort of get them out of my head and on paper, and just sort of as a way to a little bit of therapy for myself, I think. Um, and soon I sort of realized that these scenes I was writing were maybe part of a larger whole, and some of the characters were recurring, and some of the themes were popping up in a bunch of different sort of one-off, not short films, not anything specific, but just sort of these dramatized scenes I was writing. And then I had a folder of them, and I put them together and realized that some of these moments from my childhood maybe actually were linked in some way, and they kind of influenced each other. And soon I kind of had a feature-length script of all these little moments, and I started inventing moments, and I started writing certain scenes that kind of happened, but in a very exaggerated way, or the version of the scene that I wished had happened that didn't happen in my childhood. So uh, it became kind of a patchwork of exaggerations and dreams, and every now and then there's something in the film that is exactly from my childhood, but it's pretty rare. A lot of that kind of got filtered out as I continued to write.
Well, you actually said exactly what I was going to say, that it has a patchwork quality to it, and
Sure.
I mean that in a complimentary fashion. And we should say that the film feels a lot more sensory than narrative
Sure.
driven.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a plot, and there is sort of a beginning, middle, and end in some capacity, but the narrative is very thin, and the guiding light throughout the film is sort of just the themes and the way that they're explored, um, different ways by different characters, and each scene, whether it seems like it initially or not, does in some way comment on being an adolescent boy and experiencing mortality or death or brotherhood, and sort of it's a series of formative moments in a child's life, that do have a sequence to them that I did intentionally, but you could also say that some scenes could maybe be moved from the beginning to the end, and it would make it just sort of a different story, but not necessarily a less clear story. So it's designed to be kind of experienced moment to moment, and there is sort of some bigger picture things I'm trying to say, but yeah, it's absolutely more about kind of being in the place with these people and experiencing them moment to moment. And it doesn't have, a traditional three-act structure.
Watching the two brothers and their friends roaming around in the woods and playing in these derelict buildings, it seems to me to be something of a bygone era, in the sense that parents are so paranoid now,
Sure.
and everyone's got a leash on their kids. Is it still that way in New Jersey where it was shot, or again is this because you're going back to your own childhood,
Right.
even though it's clearly set in the now?
Yeah. It's it's a really good question. I don't know if I'm knowledgeable enough to comment on how people still raise their kids there, because I haven't lived there for quite a while. But when I go back, and when I visit other places in America, I mean, it's very specific. It's a very specific location for me, because it's where I grew up and it's where I spent the first 18 years of my life. But kind of all around the country, and like we were saying before, all around the world, there's these sort of pockets of places that kind of time forgot a little bit, and there's cities that are a few hours away, but people live miles from each other, and it's not like suburbs, and it's not like other sorts of neighborhoods. It's everyone kind of is sort of on their own, and you see a neighbor once a day maybe, and I think there's just a different way. It's not any safer to live there, but for some reason it feels like you can just let your son or daughter go out and say, come back when it gets dark, and we're going to have dinner at 8, so just come back by then, and if you're going to be later, let me know. So there's, for some reason, it's just a little bit more relaxed, and it's not any worse kind of parenting. I actually think it's a great kind of parenting. But that's a question I get a lot, and I do think that even in the past 10, 15 years, a lot has changed, and it is sort of a time capsule, I think, when you watch it, and it's vague in when it takes place, but it's hopefully has kind of a timeless feeling to it.
And what about your child actors in terms of their own experience growing up? Like, do they find the things that they're doing in the film, is that quite foreign to them?
Right. I think the older boy Nate had a somewhat similar experience. I mean, he's very athletic. He's very active. I think he probably. I'm not knowledgeable exactly what his hometown is like, but he seemed to be a little bit more in line with the character than say Ryan, who's he kind of does a lot of sailing, and he comes from Connecticut, just up north of New York. So he had a little bit different upbringing, I think, certainly than I did, and I think in some ways it was almost a source of escapism for him, because it was so different than his way of playing, and he was, first time he had to get really dirty, you could see him sort of like just reveling in it, like he doesn't get to do this very often, and I think for him it was actually a lot of fun, whereas for Nate I think it was a little more familiar to him.
And no doubt that informs the performance.
Sure. Well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first few days he was, we didn't have much time to do rehearsals or prepare very much with the kids. They barely had met each other before we shoot. So the first day was kind of just, we shot only 1 or 2 scenes, and they were scenes that were maybe not even going to be in the final film, just to sort of ease people into it. And you could see them sort of literally like kind of settling into their clothes and sort of this new environment, and me telling them about this is what I did when I was a kid right in this very spot, and I think that was very helpful to them to know that it kind of had a real meaning to me, and so that they tried to sort of reflect themselves onto that same meaning, and yeah, certainly I think being on location, whether they're meaningful to the director or not, just being outside, being in a real place that real people live and live their lives, I think changes the performance. It also changes the way the crew works. I think there's just a different mindset when you work on a stage and you have 10 to 6 and everybody takes lunch at 1, and it's less of a job and more of just kind of a communal experience.
So they're in this evergreen kind of bucolic playground, but it also feels the film opens with a shot of a snake devouring its prey. So there is kind of this sense of dread hanging over the film, and it's almost like nature doesn't want man there.
Right.
They're playing with that wall, aren't they? And he kicks it down, and there are all the spiders, which kind of scare them off, and they find the dead blackbird, and it's there's something very ominous about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good reading of that. I mean, I wanted nature to be sort of a back and forth force in the film, and there's scenes where it feels very expansive and freeing, and it's a place they escape to get rid of the fears that they've been feeling in their neighborhood. And then there's also times where it's very overwhelming and kind of imposing, and sometimes it's the same location, and just depending on what the scene is, the location can take on 2 different meanings. And I do like the idea of nature sort of not necessarily not wanting man there, but just sort of reminding us of kind of who's in charge. And there are there's those houses that have been abandoned for decades, and they're sort of being taken back, and the vines are coming inside the house, and it's sort of being reclaimed by nature. And I think that's definitely a running theme in the film, is the sort of simultaneous beauty of it all, and also sort of the danger and mystery of it all.
Well, I was hoping you could maybe fill me in on a thought that's been roiling around upstairs and hasn't quite formed yet, but this morning I was thinking about the fact that they're playing in these derelict buildings, and later in the film there's a scene where Eric trashes a house, and that effectively becomes a derelict building, and is that saying something about their sense of family there, their sense of security?
That's really interesting. I think that, wow.
In that they go back to the house, and you realise like it resembles, it's exactly like the places that they're playing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something I was playing with the idea of home and the idea of where you sort of where you feel comfortable. And I think most people, when if you ask them that question, their first instinct would be my house. I love to come home to my house. That's sort of where my things are. I've set it up. It's my sort of bastion. And what I wanted to sort of say in the film is the idea of home and family is this sort of fluid thing, and I don't know if necessarily that the idea of that house becoming derelict was something on the forefront of my mind, but I really like that idea. But I was certainly trying to say something about the place you feel the most comfortable is sometimes out in the wild, where you don't have any control. And I think places that have been sort of forgotten and taken back by the world around it, or sometimes where that unfamiliarity is sometimes, for me personally and for the characters in this film, sort of almost more comforting than the sort of sterile familiarity of your home.
And we've talked about them a little bit, but I think they deserve a bit more of our attention here. Your two stars, who really just beautifully anchored this movie. And weirdly, I was thinking I'd seen this not long after seeing Jeff Nichols' Mud,
right,
and was just thinking we're in a great period for coming of age dramas. But these two actors that you have, I mean, they really look like brothers.
Right.
It's so striking. You struck gold.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, was it hard finding them, or?
Yeah, they're incredible, and they are in every scene in the film, and that was the biggest fear probably in pre-production, is that we needed to find these two kids. And I've worked with kids before, and they've been great, but you can always there's always that sort of feeling that you're watching a kid try to perform and not necessarily just be themselves. And all the greatest performances from adults to kids in history are always when you sort of forget you're watching an actor and you're just sort of watching a real person. So we did an open casting call. We had no casting director or anything like that. We just saw a couple hundred kids in the New York area, and Ryan and Nate were immediately obvious to us that these were the two kids. And it wasn't even a look. We didn't even realize how similar they looked until we got them on set and we filmed a scene that got cut from the film where they were getting all their heads shaved by their mom on their porch. And when they were both finished, we were like, oh my God, this is kind of uncanny. And a lot of people do think they're brothers until the credits roll and they have different last names. So that ended up being wonderful. And the first day we shot a scene with the two of them, and they were able to do a whole take, a master shot from beginning to end, which is how I wanted to shoot a lot of the film. And it was kind of plan A, but we also sort of secretly had a plan B where we were going to shoot a little more traditionally and get coverage and sort of build their performances in the edit, which is how you sometimes work with kids. You get a little bit here and a little bit there, and then you sort of piece together the performance. The first time they were able to just do a master all the way through was a huge sigh of relief, because we got to shoot it sort of plan A, which was a little bit more locked off and more designed masters and a little bit more deliberately paced. So yeah, they were the heart and soul of the film, and a total pleasure to work with, and it was a thrill.
It sounds like in that regard they were kind of preternaturally gifted at being natural.
Right.
But maybe you could talk a little bit more about your approach to directing kids, having done it before.
Sure. Yeah, I think I learned on a couple short films how not to direct kids, and I think what my mistake at first was that I was directing them like I was directing a very experienced adult actor, and then I would sort of make the opposite mistake, and I would direct them like a child, like almost an insulting level of okay, I remember to go here, and then you have to say this line, but make sure that you turn to him and say it like this, and then this is the word that it's really important in the sentence, and it becomes so overwhelming for them that you can see them thinking and watching their feet and making sure they're hitting their marks and waiting for the other person to fully finish their line and then deliver their line, and there's no performance happening other than the technical elements. And what I sort of found a happy middle ground in this film where they are professional actors, whether they've done it or not. They're willing to put themselves out there and put themselves into the role and be very honest and tell a complete stranger, which was me at the time, their biggest fears and their biggest worries and personal family moments that they've had that we could use in the performance. And I needed to return that trust to them. So they had about as much freedom as they could have. And it was a lot of just kind of small adjustments here and there. They could sort of say whatever they wanted to say as long as they got the main idea of the scene somehow in there. Certain moments were more important for the plot. There's a few plot points in the film, and they sometimes would need to reference those or set those up to come later. But for the most part, they got to move and say whatever they wanted, and it was just sort of me kind of sneaking in and making an adjustment and then getting out of the way and doing another take. And and I think that's just the way that I found to work best with them, is to just give them as much respect as they're giving you, and trust that what they're doing is going to be the more authentic. I mean, I wrote a full script, but they're the ones who are actually 11 and 15, so they know how to say things, and they weren't afraid to sometimes say, I could tell they were fumbling a line in a couple takes, and I would ask them, is there a problem with the line? They go, well, actually, this doesn't sound like anything I would say or any of my friends would say. We would say this. So we would let them, kind of have a little bit of authority on the script, and I think it paid off.
When you were writing this, did you, at least in the beginning, just getting in that mindset and casting yourself back to being a kid,
Right.
was that a challenge, writing children's dialogue?
A little bit. I mean,
Young adults, I should say.
Yeah. There isn't a lot of dialogue, even in the script. So I never got too hung up on making it sound like a child's voice in the script. Also, I knew that I was going to sort of throw that out once we got on set. It was sort of just a guide. So I never got too hung up on that. And writing scenes from my own childhood was actually kind of fun. And once I got over the idea of trying to remember it specifically, like I never went to my parents and said, "Is this right? Like, was it actually like this?" It became less about the actual truth and more just sort of about the kind of the soul of what happened. And it doesn't really matter if what ended up on screen is entirely true. It's sort of the emotions are correct to what I remember. And I became more interested in the idea of sort of the imperfections in memory of your childhood, and that's what's on screen. And it's more it's more about the sort of universal truth rather than the actual truth.
If their childhood feels like it's out of a bygone era, the film does too, to a certain extent. And in terms of kind of contemporary reference points, I could really only think of someone like Jeff Nichols.
Sure.
So I'm just kind of wondering your kind of influences in terms of cinema.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because people bring up Jeff Nichols a lot, and I didn't see Mud until just a few months ago. So far after that, I made the film, and I do see the similarities. But my biggest influences, I would say, as a director, specifically with this film, Lynn Ramsey's Ratcatcher is a big point of reference for me, and one of my favorite films ever. And David Gordon Green's George Washington, and a lot of people's first films, though, which I sort of didn't realize until I put them all together and I sort of started answering this question. I was like, actually, these are a lot of my favorite directors' first feature films, and they all sort of deal with their hometowns and children and sort of darker sides of coming-of-age stories. And even Tarkovsky, who's one of my favorite directors, his first film was Ivan's childhood, and it was, again, sort of kind of a different kind of coming-of-age film, but again, it has a lot of similarities with these other movies, and those were sort of my main points of reference for this. And another film people always talk about is Stand By Me when they watch this, which is I think if they watched it again, they wouldn't think it was so similar, but it is one of those movies I saw when I was very young that had a very big impact on me. So I think subconsciously, that definitely made its way into the film.
Well, in terms of the subconscious and what we internalize, that seems to be, and I only caught this the second time seeing it, was that when Eric is taking his brother into the river and he's terrified. Mm-hmm. And he plops him down in the water and it's okay. Later there's a beautiful scene in which he takes his dog, mm-hmm. and reenacts that moment, and it feels to me like how we internalize and repeat the actions of kind of those that we love and are close to and respect, and it's like the scene where Eric is at the dinner table and saying he wants to get out of here. It seems like he's got a pretty stable home life. I felt like he's simply saying that because that's something his best friend has been saying. Right. He's overheard it and he's repeating that too. Right. I mean, is this something you're conscious of? Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot even more so in the original script. Actually, there was a lot of sort of call and response and scenes that sort of bookended the film. And the beginning was almost sort of, A, B, C, D, and then it was sort of D, C, B, A at the end. And there was sort of a lot of one character doing something and one character repeating it. And there is still a lot in there, and you've mentioned a few of them. And I think there's something about not just like following the footsteps of your parents or your older brother, but also of your friends, and sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. And I think as a younger brother myself, I was often sort of watching what my parents were doing and what my older brother was doing, and sort of filtering it and trying to see, is that a good thing to do? Is that a bad thing to do? So that's definitely something I wanted to comment on. And the boys are being influenced not only by the event, but
but they're not sure how to act, so they're sort of taking cues from people around them. So Tommy is looking to Eric, and Eric is sort of looking to this friend of his, and everyone sort of wants to be told. It's easier to be told how to feel and how to act than to try to figure it out on your own, especially at that age. So they're all sort of looking for someone to just tell them how to make sense of this whole situation.
And what are the plans for the film in terms of a release? I know obviously it's doing the festival circuit right now, and it came to LFF with a sales agent. Is there any movement on that for distribution here or in the US?
Yeah,
what's the state of play right now?
There's actually a distributor called Matchbox that's releasing it in the UK in either late February or early March. So it'll be in a few screens here. And in the US, we have a distributor that just came on a few weeks ago. So around the same time next year will be a few cities in the US, and then I'm finally on to VOD and iTunes and Netflix. So a small theatrical in the US, followed by kind of the traditional path of digital, and then hopefully onto DVD and that kind of thing. And but yeah, the UK later next year, early next year.
That was interesting phrasing. You said the traditional path of digital.
Right.
Which doesn't feel that way. But it
Yeah.
must be exciting for a
Yeah.
filmmaker like yourself working at a certain level, that it opens up so
Sure.
many more avenues.
Yeah, I mean, when I was making this film, I was just sort of testing myself to see if I could even make a movie, and I never expected it to be. I hoped it would be good, but if it wasn't good, I could just sort of bury it, and then now I've learned a lot of lessons to make another film, and I would have never anticipated playing the festivals we've played and getting distribution and being in a theatrical run. I thought that the chance of someone like me getting to see their film on a marquee on this street in New York was long gone. So we're very lucky, and I think we're sort of in the last sort of wave of people who might get to experience that. It's getting harder and harder to get a movie in theaters if you're not a huge budget production with stars and things like that. So when I say traditional VOD, it is only a few years old, but for filmmakers and for films like mine, that is sort of become the traditional way to get it out there. And you're very lucky if you get into a theater, and you're even very lucky if you get kind of decent placement on iTunes. And there's so many films on there that you get on there, but you're buried very low down on the page, and you don't get many. It's become this whole new way of thinking that I was originally pretty frustrating, but I think once you sort of figure out how to do it, there's money to be made there, and there's ways to get it out to more fans, and more people can see it. So I think in the end, it's a very good thing. There's way more people around the world who are able to see the film than would have 10 or 20 years ago. But it's also a little sad that I feel like it's sort of the end of the era of driving to your nearest city to see this one movie that's playing on one screen. I think for me that was how I saw some of the films that were most important to me as a kid. I would drive 2 hours to the city on a weekend and see 5 movies at the Angelica or wherever in New York, and I'm not sure how much longer that's going to be the way it's done. So I feel pretty lucky to have snuck in there at the end, I think.
It's interesting that the progress of the future is also evoking the past in a way, if you think about it, because iTunes has become, we lost Virgin Megastores and things like that for a long time, and we bought all our DVDs and Blu-rays on Amazon, and that's been the way that you've done it for years, and iTunes has kind of brought back that kind of searching through the story,
right.
finding things that you didn't know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's certainly a bit of exploration involved, and that is exciting. But and things look better than they used to, and they're easier. And I have an embarrassing number of DVDs in my apartment that I'm never going to watch because they're all on iTunes, they're all on Netflix. They're in HD. I could just click and it starts playing. I can stop it and pick it up exactly where I stopped, and we're sort of spoiled, I think. So I don't know. I'm still sort of trying to figure it out. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad, and I still think sitting in a dark room surrounded by strangers is the best way to watch a film. But there's a lot to be said for all the new technology coming out and how it's allowing people like me to get it out more, and for people who aren't lucky enough to live near a city where these films are playing can see it the day it comes out in the theater. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
Well, we hope that those strangers in a dark room who are seeing the film later today will be responsive to it, and I really do think they will. I can say it right now, and I've said it since seeing it, Tribeca. It's one of the best 10 films I've seen this year.
Thank you.
a really, really spectacular movie, and best of luck with the screenings.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks so much.